Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's last session of Scale Up. I hope we have an interesting conversation, although I will be doing most of the talking. But my proposal today is to think a bit about whether time has come to reset our species, and we'll think about together about some of the basics of our nature and the world that we've created today. So without further ado, let me have a start. I'll start with saying who I am. So my name is Amélie de Marcelly, and I am the academic director for the recently created Center for Health, Wellbeing and Happiness here at IE. About a year ago, we launched this center under the leadership of Mario Alonso Puig, whom many of you will know as a sort of management guru who was initially a surgeon. And with Mario, we've launched this center with the idea of creating opportunities for students to learn about performance, about how it is to flourish. So before I go into the subject, I wanted to tell you who I am. So my background is, I'm actually a lawyer, and I practiced law for many years, in-house and outside counsel. And then about 7 years ago, I moved to start leading a business and a P&L. So when I suddenly made a big shift from a professional perspective and led a $330 million P&L for a services organization with Cisco System, where I had been working for many years. And then while I was doing that, I did a master's here at IE of positive leadership and strategy, and eventually left Cisco, and now I'm the academic director for this center. And I'm really interested in leadership and management, and it's all how but people flourish in teams. And so what I want to talk to you about today is, what is it that we need to do in the 21st century to really be the best we can with what we've been given? So let me move into the subject of our talk today. If you think about the Center of Health, Wellbeing and Happiness, what we want to build, as I said, is the courses and the seminars that will teach students about their health, their well-being, and their happiness. And if you think of it, health is what we have in our body, right? And this is what we're given. This is what we have. This is how we come into the world. Secondly, our well-being is very determined by how we are. And so if you think of it, it is how we choose how we are, how we behave in the world. And then if we think about happiness, it's linked to our purpose, you know, the fundamental beat that we have, where we find the reason and the place we have in this world. And that's really linked to what we become. And that's why those are the three pillars of our center. So let me move into the deep of the subject. You, all of you, are Homo sapiens. And if you think of it, about 200,000 years ago until about 100,000 years ago, there were 6 different species on this planet. So first of all, you will have heard Homo Neanderthal. We have, a lot of us in Europe have some genes from Neanderthal, if you've done the genetic test. Secondly, there was another kind of Homo, that was called Homo soloensis, and they lived on the island of Java. And they lived together at the same time. Thirdly, there was another species called Homo erectus that lived in East Asia. After that, there was also at the same time a guy called Homo floresiensis, and they were dwarves who lived on the island of Flores. And then finally, for a quite recent finding has been Homo denisova, and in Siberia. And we found that this Homo denisova actually mixed with Homo Neanderthal. And so today, if we think about these 6 species that lived together for many, many hundreds of years, actually the only species that is left is Homo sapiens, and that's us. So there's many reasons why we think that some of the basics of our wiring from about 200,000 years ago are still here, is if we now look into what neurology has discovered over the past 20, 25 years. And what neuroscientists have found is that there's really a basic equation in life. And we have 5 main needs. And those are, we need to eat, we need to reproduce, we look for social power, so social status is important to us. We look to be comfortable, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And finally, we acquire information, we're curious, we like to learn. And so those 5 things, if you think about the world that we've created today, if you think of eating, snap, I click on a button and I get food. If you think of reproduction or having sex, you could say click click a button or snap a finger. It's rather easy to reproduce or to find a sexual partner. If you think about gaining social power, look at the social media platforms that we've created, and we're so attached to our social media activities. And so this is the way that in the 21st century we show our social power. Now, we like to be comfortable. We're hedonic by nature, so we look for pleasure, and that's part of our basic wiring. And then finally, and as I said, it's very easy to give ourselves pleasure in many different ways. We'll look into that a bit later in the conversation. And then finally, click. If we want more information, if we want to learn, look at you today. You just clicked on a link, and here you are in this room acquiring more information. And probably because of COVID, we're doing even more of that, right? And it's easier and easier to access information. It's at the tip of our finger. So if you think of the world that we've created, it's made us incredibly impatient, right? If you think about how easy it is to meet our basic needs, it means that we cannot stand the frustration of not getting our food on time or getting the little pleasures that we have in our lives as quickly as we're now used to, thanks to the technology that we've built. And so the question I usually ask students when we come to this point, and unfortunately I can't interact that well with you, but I'll try and switch and look at you, is how long for the men in the room does it take you to grow a beard? And so you can just wink to me and say how many months or let's say, how many days does it take you to grow a beard? Can you just wave at me and say how many days it takes you? 10 days? Yeah. 2 days? 5 days? So about 10 days as well. Thank you, Santiago. So what my point here is no one gets really frustrated, none of you, but because click, 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 you didn't get your beard, right? So because it's not one of our basic needs. And if we look at the women in the room, then if you think of it, we don't go and snap, here's a child, right? It takes us 9 months to have a child come to, in best situation, be born. So we've created a world that's quite hectic for ourselves, and where we meet our needs in a very easy way, and we've become more and more impatient. So I'll switch there to say there's one thing we have to remember of our Homo sapiens nature, deep nature, is that the way we lived, about 200,000 years ago is very different to this forensic world that we've created for ourselves. And therefore, there's a book by a guy called Daniel Lieberman. He's a professor at Harvard University, and he's written this book about exercise. And one of the things he does is to bust a few myths. And I really like this myth to say that he busts in his book, which talks about exercise and running. But he says it is a myth that it's unnatural to be lazy. So on the one hand, we're kind of wired for being lazy, and we've created this world where we're at 250 kilometers an hour, working really fast and getting some of our basic needs filled in a very, very easy way. So keep that in mind. Now, if I look at what are the basics of our nature and the context in which we lived, 200,000 years ago till about 10,000 years ago is when we started agriculture, right? And so we lived in hunter-gatherer societies, and if you think of it, the food was scarce. We didn't really know when we were going to be able to eat. In fact, if you look at the hunter-gatherers that are still left on this earth today, some tribes are able, if they find honey, they are able to drink a whole liter of honey to feed themselves, because you didn't really know when the next food is going to come. And so if you imagine, any of us would probably have a very tough time ingesting that amount of sugar in our bodies, right? But so the food scarcity determined, to some extent, our behavior. And then we also had constant threat. And this is very important. So we were constantly threatened by, the environment. We were threatened by other humans who were living at the same time as us before we stayed the only ones alive on this earth. We had disease, of course, and animals that could attack us. So it was a situation where detecting threat was incredibly important. So the ability to detect it was incredibly fundamental to our survival. There's also another context which is important to remember, is we are the only species that is able to give birth to children who are not fully able to live on their own. I mean, look at the whole animal world. Most babies are born and they immediately, within a few hours, get up and they're autonomous. Homo sapiens babies do not have that capacity, and therefore they need to be looked after, they need to be bred, and this leads to the very important sociability aspect of our context of where we lived. So it took literally a village to raise a child, and therefore we needed to live in groups, right? And therefore that's why one of our basic needs is to show our position, our social position within a group. So if you think of that, and we think about how that has impacted our brains and the wiring, the basic wiring that we have, you can look at this division and this explanation that is now a bit outdated, but it's good for the purpose of explaining some of our basic instincts. So there we have one part of our brain is called the reptilian brain, and it's the most ancient part of our brain. And it's the one that sort of manages the basic fight, flight, or freeze. Those are the three options that you have when you go into the reptilian brain. And this is very important to remember as we look at the different parts of the brain. The second one is the limbic brain, and it's essentially associated with the emotional brain. So this is where we have learning, we have memory, but essentially that's where the emotions live, if you like, in our brains. And then thirdly, there's the neocortex, which is the most recent part of our brain. In fact, it's all the part that's wrinkled inside our skulls. In fact, if we opened our skulls and took it out, it would be about a 60-inch screen. So in order to fit into our skulls, it needs to be wrinkled as it is today. But that is the place where we do abstract thinking, where we have our learning abilities. This is where we do the planning, the rational us is there. And the one thing that you have to remember is that the reptilian brain is incredibly fast, and the neocortex, on the contrary, is much slower. Many of you have read the book about thinking fast and slow. It's the same idea. So we're much quicker at finding and identifying threat than we are at rationalizing what is going on around us. So remember that. Again, I just want to stress this separation is a bit old, but it does help us for the purpose of what I'm trying to convey here. The three separations are not as clear now as neuroscientists have found. So think about that, right? We're a very fast brain that finds threat. Now, if you think about that, and we live in the fourth industrial revolution, right? What is it that has created this amazing world that we're in? The first industrial revolution, second, third, fourth, probably upcoming the fifth industrial revolution, which is led by, back to humanness, if you like, and more of stakeholder capitalism. So not so much looking at shareholder value, but looking at stakeholder value and what is the impact of a company on all of the ecosystem that it touches when it does business. So sort of a circular economy approach where you look at not only suppliers and customers, but you also look at the environment, you look at the society that a company is involved in. So if you think of it, this is the absolute result of our amazing brains. This is what has made us actually survive in this world. And actually some of the research around why we survived Neanderthal is because we have an incredible ability to learn and because we're incredibly social. So Neanderthal had bigger brains and they had lots of tools and they were very evolved, but they didn't learn as fast as we did. And that's one of the reasons there's still research to try to explain why we survived and they didn't. So the world that we've created is a world that goes at 100 miles an hour, incredibly technological, but we're still wired in some of our basic functions like we were 200,000 years ago. So the question I ask you and myself, as I think about this subject and as a director for the Center for Health, Wellbeing and Happiness, I kind of think, is it time that we reinvent ourselves, just like this dog from my favorite cartoonist in The New Yorker? Just like this dog being a dog, perhaps needs to be thinking about a different way of behaving, and not so much like a dog anymore. So do we conform to what our basic wiring, or do we not conform to this world that we've created oops, sorry, I'm clicking too fast now. Are we not conforming to this world that we've created? So I'll pause here for a second and switch gears for a few moments. If you think about the internet, do you know, and maybe you can have a guess in the chat if you want to do that, is to say what are the two most viewed videos on YouTube or on the internet in general? So one of them is cats, because I tell you that. Can you guess which one is the first one? Have a wild go at Baby Shark. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one too. Anyone else? Thank you, Tarek. Harvey, more kittens. Yes, I'll explain why the kittens are so exciting to us. Anyone else wants to have a wild guess? Okay, so the first most watched video on YouTube is actually, and in the internet, is actually pornography. But we won't go into that, and I'll explain to you why kittens are the second most used videos on the internet. But it's for the same reason. And what the research has found is that kittens have big eyes, they have small noses, small chins, small foreheads, and they remind us of babies. And therefore, our natural instinct to protect comes out. And so what happens when we see something that we want to protect? We get a little surge of dopamine. So you've heard what the dopamine is. Dopamine is a hormone that we produce when we feel pleasure. It's also a very important hormone to motivate us, to get us our asses out of the seats to do and to get into action. And we have a lot of that. It's a very powerful system. So when we see a kitten and we feel it's cute and it opens our hearts and it feels like a baby and we feel protective, suddenly we have a little surge of dopamine. The same happens in any other videos that we look at and we feel good about. Now, the other day, a student in class asked me, so why isn't the videos of babies the first videos that people watch, right? And my assumption, again, I didn't look at the research in detail, whether that was a paragraph in there, but my assumption is that babies do not continue to be as cute as the kittens on this GIF, but they actually end up crying or being, a bit more of a nuisance. But what this shows you is it's actually a circle in which we get stuck as human beings. Because remember, one of the 5 things we care about is getting pleasure. And so we get stuck in this reward system that's powered by dopamine. Now, this reward system was actually discovered in 1954. So it's not something new. We've known this for a long time. And it was discovered by a group of scientists who were investigating on rats. And they had these electrodes on their brains. And one of the rats was behaving in a different way. And so the researcher thought, what's going on? And then he realized he hadn't really put it in the same place as the others. And this is where he discovered this reward system, because when he placed the electrode properly on the brain of the rat and found that they could power themselves, this appearance or this production of dopamine by themselves, and they could action a little lever where they would action their own dopamine release. What the rats did is they started losing interest in what they were doing, and they were in their rat life. They lost interest in food, and eventually, they were so hooked on their dopamine surge that they actually ended up dying. So this is, of course, none of this research has been done on humans, but what it does is the same circle, and we get caught in this absolute vicious circle of a little dopamine surge. And this is why we end up scrolling and scrolling and scrolling on our social media, or we get hooked into activities that give us this dopamine circle, and we get stuck. And suddenly we look at the watch and you say, oh my God, I thought it was 5 minutes, and we spent a whole half hour of our time on something that produces this little pleasure, like kittens or other activities, Baby Shark, or funny videos. So this is our trap, in a way. And if you think of it, we've known this forever, right? Oscar Wilde, has quoted to say, "I can resist everything except temptation." So this is who we are. This is our basic wiring. So what do we do now? Is probably your question, right? And so if you think of something we've discussed a lot with the students in the seminars, is around this a documentary that's come out on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. Because if you push even more, so we're locked into our dopamine surge and our dopamine system. And then if you look at what Jason Lanier, who's one of the founders of the internet, says, it's that eventually what the social media does is that it changes who you are. And so I think if you haven't seen the documentary, I would invite you to do so and have conversations with your children, with your family and friends, because I think what it does show us is that we've created a world that meets our basic needs. And we've created a world that's been designed by other smart Homo sapiens to actually get us tricked into something which I would question whether we're using our amazing brain in the same way that we've used this for the past thousands and hundreds of thousands of years to evolve to the 21st century. And perhaps this whole way of being trapped in these loops is stopping us from providing the best that Homo sapiens has provided until now, which is incredible innovation, incredible improvement in our way of life. And so I think we have a choice. And this is the invitation of this seminar as well, is you have a choice about how to decide what you consume on the internet, decide what you spend your time doing. And again, if you think about the choice that we have in between the kitten videos, and even if we think about our lives, it's pretty critical that we define the world that we want to live in for the 21st century, because there is a point where perhaps what we've created has become a bit bigger than what we can handle. And so if you're interested, I gave a TED Talk for IE back in June, where I try again to position this key question. Is it time for us to know more about ourselves, to reset ourselves so we become cleverer than the world that we've created in the 21st century? So there is one, I will leave you with a sort of an idea of, there is one antidote to our dopamine reward system, and that's called willpower. And this book here by Baumeister and Tierney is very interesting. And so willpower is the ability to exert self-control on ourselves. It's ability to resist our impulses, right? And as we've seen, it's very important to our social life, right? Because we are essentially social animals. And so therefore, if you look at if you read the book, it's a very interesting book. But one of the things they found, and the reason why it's so important, is they looked at people who were on parole boards for prisons. So inmates who wanted to go on parole and went to this committee, and they found that the committee was very lenient early in the morning, and then as the day went by, they became more and more restrictive. They would concede less parole. And so they found that really what was happening is that the willpower, because it takes a lot of willpower to go and decide for a person's fate in life, right? And so they were very powered up and they had all the energy in the morning, and then during the course of the day, that willpower went down, and therefore they became more conservative. However, when they had their 11 o'clock break and they had a little snack, they found that the willpower went back up. So there was a real, it's an invitation here to really manage your willpower and be aware of it when you're being drained. And if you look at the book, it gives you a few tips, and I'll build them out here on the slide. But what it tells you is that when you are depleted, you need to be aware of that. So that you make the decisions, and the tough ones, at the moment where you have the highest willpower. And it's because during the day, you will see it yourself, your willpower to resist temptation goes away, right? And in the evening, we feel more tempted by our social media, or whatever is our little pleasure loop, than we are in the morning. So again, these are a few tips for you to think about when you learn how to resist this temptation that you have. One of the things that I'd like to call out, and we teach at the center, is your brain has a series of needs. And so if you think about the parole committee, they had a little break and had something to eat. And there again, their willpower went up. And that is directly linked to what your brain needs to feed itself with. And the brain feeds on glucose, which is basically the fast sugars of sweets, or basic sugar, or cereal, which is sort of slow sugar. But what is not very well known, and we teach in our seminars, is that the brain also feeds on ketones, which are produced by your liver when you fast. And it's also produced by, it also feeds on lactates, which is what your body produces when you exercise, when you move, which is why we always say that we have to move around after we've been sitting down for a while, because just moving your muscles a little actually helps to feed your brain, because it's able to break it down so that it feeds it properly. So again, if you think of your willpower and you feel like your resistance to temptation is going down, maybe you need to go and exercise, walk around, or you need to get some food in your body. The other ways is to find a bit more willpower if you feel like you're low on willpower and you've depleted it, is to find rituals that get you in motion. So for me, for instance, I know that my willpower is low and I'm procrastinating. I know that I put on some Bach, and music really helps me to get into a concentrated state. So I have my little ritual, right? You can also change your habits so that you go into with people who tend to do things that you would feel like doing, or have buddies that hold you accountable, or set yourself deadlines or whatever. And then if you prioritize your work between what's mission critical to your job and urgent versus what's non-mission critical and non-urgent, if you do like a good consultant's quadrant, it helps also to prioritize your work. And then finally on this, so those are a few tips for you to manage your willpower. And as I said, having had a corporate job, traveling every week with a lot of deadlines and schedules, what was really helping me was to become aware of the fact that this is something that I have to care for just as much as I have to care for the amounts of hours I sleep during the day. So let's switch gears again, because if you go back to the fundamental purpose of our center, and you can think, is really thinking about happiness really futile? Should we care about happiness? And you probably don't spend much time yourself thinking about happiness, perhaps. And so if we go back to a very important thinker of the 20th century, Albert Einstein, he said thinking about happiness, it's kind of like the moral inclination of a pig. So what do you think that Einstein meant by that? And so if we were in a more interactive environment, I would ask you for your input, but I'll do the talking. I'll do the full talking here. And what Einstein really meant was that there's two different kinds of happiness, if you think about it. There's the one that we receive from the world, and this is the one that's linked to our hedonistic needs and the fact that we like to engage in pleasurable activities, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's part of how we're wired. But there's a second, more important part of the world, which is what we contribute to the world. What is it that we give to the world? And if you think about one of the purposes of the center is to help us find happiness, is to find the fundamental reason why we've come on this earth, and what is it that we can contribute? What is it that the pulse inside us is providing? In fact, there's a lot of research that says that when we are given $20, for instance, and we go and spend it on ourselves, or spend it on someone else, the subjective happiness or well-being that we get from spending money on someone else lasts much longer than if we spend it on ourselves. So what we contribute to the world, what we give to the world, is what really gives us our purpose and our grounding. And this is where we become the best of Homo sapiens. In fact, if you think about the COVID, I think this whole situation has actually brought out the best in us, and showed that we're wired to help each other and to be connected to each other. And there's actually a young philosopher called Rutger Bregman. I have him here on the slide, and I invite you to read this book. This would be for your next holiday. It's called Humankind. And what he says is that he debunks a basic idea that there is a monster inside us that's ready to come out and be awful. And what he shows is through the study of numerous, facts, one of them being during World War II, he shows that we're wired for empathy and wired for helping each other. He goes in his prologue, if you read it, before World War II, there was a book that apparently both Churchill and Hitler and Roosevelt and Mussolini had read, and it was called Psychology of the Masses, Psychologie des Foules. There's a guy called Henri Le Bon, he was named, and he said that when things fall apart, the monster comes out. And this is what they all believed, right? And so when the Germans started blitzing London, if you look at what happened at that time, what Rutger Bregman tells in his book, is that actually the absolute opposite happened. People stuck together and they became braver and they were helping each other. And they actually saw the same happen when the Allies bombed the Germans, because the idea was you needed to get the civilians, really frightened and terrified, and therefore the beasts would come out in them and the havoc would arrive. But actually it's quite the opposite that happens. And I think this book is incredibly powerful in that it reverses a lot of the things that we think about the evil person that we have inside, when actually we're pretty much wired to help each other. And this is what Einstein was saying, because in his context, obviously, a pig is an animal that just receives, and for him, in his context, giving back to science in the way that he did was what really was the purpose of happiness and being happy. So I encourage you to read the book if you're interested, but it debunks many stories around the given ideas that we have about what it is to be happy and what it is to be a human being. Now, about a year ago, about this time of the year, we had the pleasure of inviting Talban Shahar. And Talban Shahar is a happiness guru now. But at the time, or before he joined, he was one of the most successful professors at Harvard University, because he taught two of the most successful classes around positive psychology in Harvard University. More than about 1,000 students attended his classes. And so he came and we had a chat about happiness, about what it means to have a fulfilled and flourishing life. And so again, what Tal will tell you as he studies happiness, and he still does, is that it isn't about getting up every morning saying, I want to be happy, because actually that probably makes you miserable. You have to look at happiness as something that it's the journey that you're on, it's the process, it's the steps that you take every day to be more happy that actually makes you happy. So that's why he says the key thing, and it's many books that he's written, one of them is Happier, is just if you make a small incremental change to your life and to how you perceive your own life, is what makes you happy in the long run. And I think the reason why it's important for all of you as business people and entrepreneurs is that when you are happier about the life you're leading, you're actually more creative. Because being a bit more contented with our lives makes us more open to other people, and therefore more able to lead teams, to make better decisions. Because when we go and we're permanently under stress and heavy and burdened by all the challenges that we have to deal with when you run a business, which I'm incredibly aware of as I ran my business a few years ago in Cisco, what I did find when I studied here at IE, a positive leadership and strategy master's, is that actually happiness is a choice and it's a skill. And so it's something that we have to learn. And because the world that we've created is slightly more complex, and it's getting more and more complex, it justifies the reason for being of the center, where we want to show at our university that when you study law, you study business, you study architecture and design, you study global and public affairs, or you study human science and technology, you also need to learn the skills to be good at having a fulfilled life. And many of us learned it the hard way, or learned it through our own interest and curiosity, but it's actually part of a curriculum nowadays. And so it's I guess, very pioneering from IE to position the center not as a part of the psychology department, which is where Talban Shahar was teaching his courses. It's not part of the counseling department either, and it's not part of the sports department, because we do have some courses around how do you maintain your body as well. And so it's a very pioneering to say this is part of the curriculum of all the schools, and frankly, it's something that we all need to learn to survive in the 21st century in this incredibly fast-paced, complex world that we've created for ourselves. And so that's the invitation of the talk today, and it's the invitation of the center. Because if you think about it, our bodies, your body, my body, they work 365 days, 24 hours a day, every single day. And so there's nothing that gives your kidneys or your lungs or your pancreas a rest. They don't rest, they keep going. And they're a combination of fluids and air that comes in and comes out. And so that body is your ally. What are we doing to look after our bodies? And so again, that's I think the responsibility we have to look after it like a little plant. And the same goes with our mind. If you think our minds, and this is who we are, right? We choose who to be in every moment. And our minds are incredibly fragile. Remember, our brains, the fight, flight, freeze. So immediately we detect danger, and that's our first reaction. It doesn't have to be necessarily what determines our actions. And if we learn the science of our minds, how they move through emotions, thoughts, impulses to act, all of those move us very much. And if we learn how to move from reaction to response, where we have a nanosecond to learn what is the most skillful way of dealing with a situation that comes up, again, it helped me hugely as a leader to be able to be adaptive. The more we understand our mind, the more adaptive we are. And as leaders of the 21st century, we don't have a choice but to be adaptive, right? And then if you think of our souls, how much time do we spend looking at, looking for our purpose? How much time do we spend thinking about our lives, thinking about how our best contribution will be? And if you think about, again, the reward system that we can get stuck in, I worry sometimes that the world that we've created has almost surpassed us or blocked us from continuing to evolve and continuing to contribute to humanity in the way that we've done for the many, many hundreds of thousands of years in the past. So that's the invitation. And if you think of any successful leader, any successful or CEO or CXO that you can think of in your area of business, they all look after their bodies, they all look after their minds and who they are, how they show up. And they all have a very, very deep purpose, which is why, spending time thinking about that is incredibly important. In fact, there is a quote by a French philosopher called Comte Sponville that I really like, and he proposes to think your life to live better, right? And so if we spend a bit of time with ourselves, thinking about our life and thinking about what we'd like to contribute to this world, actually that's how indirectly we end up in a happy place. And I'll just finish on this quote by Gandhi, which I guess is speaking for myself, a purpose for me, which is if I'm able to align my intentions, my thoughts, with my words and with my deeds and my acts, then probably that's where I'm most centered and probably as close as I can get to happiness. So thank you very much for listening to me. If you have a question, we have actually 5 minutes. If you would like to contribute, you can type into the chat, and I would be very happy to answer your questions. I would, while you think about your questions, invite you to have a reflection on if you wanted to do a reset or if you wanted to evolve and start thinking about this subject. The first thing you have to do is to see that there is something going on that perhaps should attract your attention. The second one that you can do is to start knowing, so knowledge, right? Remember our 5 basic wirings, we're curious, we acquire information. So acquire the knowledge around the question that you've found as you start seeing. And then you have to want it. And I see someone has talked about bad habits. Yes, wanting it is not enough. Sometimes it takes a lot of willpower to go and change a habit that we might have. And then we might want it, but we can't do it. And again, so if we take these 4 aspects of seeing, knowing, wanting, and being able to do it, I think that those are the 4 steps that are required to do a reset. If you have any questions, yes? Any further reading, suggesting, or talks? Yes, that's a very good question. There's so much material. Let me think about what I can tell you as, well, I would definitely read the book by Yuval Noah Harari called Homo Sapiens, or Sapiens, which that was a great inspiration to me. I would read the Humankind book by Rodger Bregman. There's a lot of books by Talban Shahar. I would say his books are incredibly useful. And you can look at him, or you can look him up on YouTube as well. He's got lots of videos about when he talks about happiness and what are the ingredients to a happy life, right? So those I think would take up a good part of your time if that helps. And thank you for the question, Hugh. What else? Okay, so I think what practices do you recommend to do to know now that we spend so much time at home and it can still be very stressful. So yes, that's a question on resilience, right? And that's a very good question. So resilience is again one of the key strengths that we can develop. And what you can do is think about when you are starting to feel anxiety, is to think about what you can control in this moment. Because many times the things that make us anxious is the rumination. And it's the things that go in our minds and they go in circles and round. And we only, because we're stuck in this loop of anxiety, we tend to become even more and more anxious, and it's a negative spiral. So the way you can pull yourself out is focus on the things that you can impact, right? What is it that you can do today, now? So for instance, you or me, we cannot find the vaccine to COVID, for instance, that obliges us to stay at home. But what we can do is to make sure that to look after our own well-being, or perhaps donate money or contribute to helping the people around us that do need help. So we know that helping others actually brings down our levels of anxiety. The second thing that you can also focus on is to make sure you look after your body. Have you done exercise? Have you eaten properly? Because all of those things, we kind of take them for granted, but actually the more stressed we are, the more the needs of our bodies are really, really important. So those could be two areas. There's a whole seminar that we're organizing for our students here on resilience, but that would be to build those capacities. So the flexibility, the ability to bring yourself back into your center and focused on what's important for you now, as opposed to solving the world's issues. I hope that helps, Harvey. We have one more minute. So how can we spread happiness and kindness to our organizations in a remote world? Well, Christelle, that's a very nice question. How can we spread happiness and kindness, especially as we're wired for it, right? And again, I don't have the answer. I don't know where you're based in the world, but I would say there's always an opportunity to be kind to the people around you. And it doesn't have to be, something big. It can be something very small, like just a very pleasant interaction with a neighbor, or just helping someone who needs help, or phoning a friend. I think one of the things that COVID has showed us is that we've connected incredibly well with people that we hadn't seen in a long time. So spreading that kindness, if you have it in you, and we all do by default, is actually much easier than we think in some cases. And it's not about doing big shebang acts. So I think we have to close now. It's a quarter till. I want to thank you for joining today. It's been great to talk to you. I hope you enjoyed the session. It got you to think. Remember that we have a choice about the life that we want to lead. And I will invite you to this next session, which is tomorrow, around GDPR. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.